Shall we begin? Let's begin now.
So now we get to binary fission, cell reproduction. It wouldn't matter if chemistry and physics and time produced a living cell if that cell didn't divide and multiply, because cells can be fragile. And if that cell gets wiped out, well, we've already talked about the crazy improbability of even just one molecular machine coming into existence, one protein machine or a ribozyme, let alone all of them together to work together. And then if that got wiped out, man, that's pretty much it. And it's amazing that each thing is that way, that DNA matters. Without DNA, you don't have life. You've got to have the instructions for what an organism is for it to keep going. Without DNA replication, nothing else matters. If nature, chemistry, physics, and time could produce everything else but not DNA replication, it wouldn't matter. Transcription. If nature could not produce transcription and it created everything else, it wouldn't matter. You've got to take a piece of the genetic code and produce that specific protein. Translation, it wouldn't matter if it created everything else. All the other machines and code and ribozyme, well, this is part of it. This is part of translation. But if it didn't produce translation, if it wasn't able to take the genetic code and produce more proteins, it wouldn't matter. If it produced proteins but not the code to produce more proteins, it wouldn't matter. And you've got chaperones. If everything else happened but there was no protein chaperones to prevent protein aggregation, oh, it wouldn't matter. And then you've got ATP synthase. If it produced everything else, it got these sequences right for all these different proteins, and it got the ribozyme, and it got the genetic code, but it didn't have either the proteins involved in glycolysis or the ATP synthase. And again, ATP synthase, even for the organisms that don't use it to produce power, they use it to pump acids out of the cell. Without ATP synthase, you don't have life. And now binary fission. If it created everything, if it had DNA replication, transcription, translation, protein chaperones, and ATP synthase, but did not have a way to divide the cell and multiply, then, oh, that cell wouldn't last forever. And even if it did, it wouldn't matter. You've got to have multiplication for more. Atheism needs binary fission to come into existence without a creator. But, ooh, that's a tough one. We're talking about machinery that can take an object and divide it into two without breaking the membrane. Can you do that? Imagine you've got to build a machine that can divide an object into two, and this object has a membrane, without breaking it. And then, of course, it has to do it with some coordination with other parts, because you've got to have a ribosome at least on each side, and you have to have DNA on each side, and you've got to have proteins that can do transcription. So you need all these parts. You've got to have chaperones. You've got to have ATP synthase on both sides. So just think about that. Be honest with yourself. Is it possible you're lying to yourself? That you don't want there to be a creator? Maybe you don't want to submit to him, or you don't want to You don't want there to be a being to tell people they're wrong. Maybe it's not even about you. Maybe you just don't want others to be told they're wrong and that they've got to submit. Because think about that. Think about everything, the programming, the coordination that has to go into binary fission, where you've got the necessary parts on each side of the membrane of the living cell, and then it divides, and you've got the essential parts on both sides. Come on. You really think that can happen without intelligence? Look at the Fitz protein. And we'll find out more later as science discovers more. And let me tell you, science is not for atheism. Scientists are, but the actual science, the actual evidence showing more machinery, more complexity, more coordination, more programming, the more we find out about binary fission, the more it will nail the coffin on abiogenesis, atheism, and materialism. Binary fission is amazing. All these parts are amazing. All these 7 things: DNA replication, transcription, translation, protein chaperones, ATP synthase, and binary fission. They're amazing. So just make sure you're not lying to yourself. I respect your right to believe whatever you want to believe and come to any conclusion that you want to come to, but be careful. Lying to yourself has consequences. DNA kills atheism. In 1 trillion years, in an infinite amount of time, nature without intelligence would never be able to produce genetic code. The recipe, the programming for an organism. In 1 trillion years, in an infinite amount of time, nature without intelligence would not be able to produce DNA replication, that amazing coordination of machinery. The same with transcription. It wouldn't know when to start and stop. How would it get that without being programmed to do so? When to start and stop a gene. Same with translation. Never in an infinite amount of time would chemistry, physics, and time produce code and the machinery to do something with code without intelligence. Translation would never happen. Protein chaperones wouldn't happen. Chemicals don't care. Protein aggregation doesn't bother chemicals. They're just chemicals clumped together. But intelligence is what it would take to produce protein chaperones. Never in an infinite amount of time would chemistry, physics, and time produce ATP synthase. And never in an infinite amount of time would nature be able to produce binary fission. Life kills atheism. All these things kill atheism. Binary fission kills atheism.